talk to Annie Machon. She's a former MI5 intelligence officer and joins us now. Good morning to you, Annie.
Good morning, Julia.
There's lots of talk this morning about maybe diplomats being expelled. Royals not going to the World Cup in Moscow in June, who apparently weren't planning to go anyway. But the reality is that when we do talk about retaliation for things like this, in the event that it does turn out to be, as many suspect, a Kremlin-linked assassination attempt, a lot goes on behind the scenes that we don't see, doesn't it?
It can do, yes, but I really do think we're at too early in a stage in this investigation to even begin to start speculating if it was Russia, if it was a Russia state-sponsored attack. There are too many known unknowns at this point. I mean, all credit to the authorities for identifying the substance that was involved so quickly. And I think we need to bear in mind as well that Skripal was a busted flush, effectively, in intelligence terms. He had been caught by the Russians. He had been put on trial, convicted and sentenced to prison. And he had cooperated with them during that process. And then he had been pardoned and released under a spy swap in 2010. So then he came back to the UK. He had worked as an MI6 spy in Russia. And MI6 will have debriefed him as well extensively upon his arrival in the UK before he's allowed to go free and be pensioned off. So I can't really see what will be in it for the Russian state to try to carry out a hit like this.
And that's the thing. It's both the motive, given that there are plenty of opportunities, as you say. I mean, he could easily he was sentenced to 13 years the penal colony, and for high treason, he could have been sentenced as he could have been taken out long before a spy swap. The timing of it so many years later. This is 8 years since he came to live here. The fact that he was living freely and was under his own name, that he could have been got at any time. But the chosen method is where I'm really confused, because this is a method. Look, as you say, we've got the known unknowns. Nothing's been proven as yet, but you know where suspicions are lying, and we know with the counter-terrorism officers being involved, we know where their line of inquiry is going. If this is a nerve agent, and if it can, from its particular chemical makeup, be traced back to Russia, then fingers will point. So if this is the Kremlin, it's a bizarre thing to choose to effectively, point the finger at yourself in this way, unnecessarily.
Absolutely. And this is why the police are now going to be conducting very careful evidential-based work to try and find out exactly who might have carried this out. And I think one thing that most people are forgetting, yes, this guy was a spy for Britain. Yes, he was involved in a spy swap. But he's been living here out in the open for the last 8 years. So I think one of the key leads of investigation for the police and for the intelligence agencies is going to be, what has he been doing in those last 8 years? Yeah. Who has he been working with, if anyone? And they will be sifting with a fine-tooth comb through his electronic communications. They will get a warrant to go into his computer, look at his telephone records, his associates, everything, to try and build up a picture to find out who might indeed have had the right motive to carry out a very high-profile hit in a very unusual location, because it does make everything point towards Russia. So you have to ask, well, could there be sort of deeper motivation there?
I mean, could it just be revenge? Could it just simply be very public revenge, a message, that I will get you when I choose to get you, from Vladimir Putin?
I think that's highly unlikely. I mean, spy swaps have been going on for decades between Russia and the West. And in no case has anyone been taken out in that way. There's no reason to do it. Once you've rinsed them out of intelligence before you hand them over, there's absolutely no point. I think it's more interesting perhaps to suggest that the fingers are made to point towards Russia in a very high profile, a very unusual hit on someone. And that's why I think the police and the intelligence agencies will be looking very closely at whom precisely he's been working with over the last 8 years.